In this message now, and I want to give you the introduction. We are experiencing an escalation throughout the United States. I had to find them, you see. Throughout the United States in tension. It's exploding. The black communities are being pitted against law enforcement and the reverse of that. It's almost impossible for us to talk about these issues without being labeled a racist or an instigator. There's a term that you find in Understanding Human Communications, 12th edition. It's called self-fulfilling prophecies. And they're being fulfilled every day. And what that is that when we have a deep-seated feeling, a belief, then we have a lens on our eyes that we interpret everything through these beliefs. Much of our problem can be addressed with true communications. If we can ever sit down and talk to each other without these stereotypes and things of this matter, if we can be open-minded, then we'll be able to see through eyes with a different perspective. In the 60s, and you're very familiar with this, Dr. Martin Luther King organized a march from Selma to Montgomery. A lot of difficulties took place. He couldn't attend that first march, and it was often referred to as Bloody Sunday, where people were beaten and some even killed. Behind the scenes, there was an activity going on between Dr. King and Lyndon Johnson, trying to procure, and then that was the protest, was to have an equal and fair ability to vote for all people, rather than putting unrealistic requirements in order for someone to qualify to vote. The third march, they did the second march, and for whatever reason, Dr. King decided, and all of this is in the movie called Selma. That's a great movie, by the way. He decided not to continue the march, whether he was concerned about some type of ambush or whether he felt like he had accomplished, because the protest objective had been accomplished. But on March the 12th, 1965, they organized the march. And instead of all these law enforcement officers being there to prevent it, all these federal officers, the National Guard, Army, federal agents were all there to make sure, about between 3,000 and 4,000, to make sure that they could make that march without being molested. So the march was completed. But there's a real march that has never been completed. There's a real bridge that has never been overcome, never been crossed. And that's a bridge of morality and a bridge or a march of morality. Being forced into something. Both sides have bitterness that exists from years and years gone by. But there's a difference from being willing and being forced. And what has to happen now, we have to see through moral eyes what is real and what should take place and what should happen. So we have to cross the bridge, the moral bridge. We have to finish the march, the moral march. There's three things I want to talk to you about today. The reasons for the escalation of violence are often cloaked. The challenges associated, number two, with understanding each other are great. Third, we must cross the bridge. The march must be completed. Now, the reasons for escalation of violence are often cloaked. In other words, there are people that have hidden agendas that we're not aware of. And that are people that really profit over these problems and this tension and this coming together in anger and violence. But we have to see beyond our prejudice. There are inevitable, impossible circumstances. There are times when things will happen and we have to interpret those things. And we need to look through eyes of morality, eyes of practicality, eyes that are not encumbered with all of these things that cause us to think the wrong things. We see through filters. It's a fact, according to Schaeffer, in-group favoritism, that we have a tendency to favor those that are in our group, whether it be racial, ethnicity. For instance, if Alabama is playing Auburn, and Alabama is called for holding, the stands boo because they don't believe it if they're Alabama fans. If they're Auburn fans, they are clapping with great joy. And if you reverse it, it reverses. It's in-group favoritism. It's a natural thing that we have to compensate for. There's socialization of children. When children are raised in families that have bitterness and hatred toward another ethnicity, then it stays with them and forms these filters that they see through, all the way into adulthood. There are exacerbating or encounters that are made worse, violent encounters, whether justified or not. When law enforcement has an occasion to have to inflict pain, it doesn't matter whether it's justified or not. One group's going to feel one way, another group's going to feel the other way, because we're looking through filters. What I'm trying to bring about today is that we're able to look through eyes that are true, that eyes that are godly, eyes that love everybody. Socialization of the news. Now, socializing someone is putting a point over and over and over and over and over until it becomes something that a person believes. But you know right now that depending on which news channel you're watching, that determines what you're going to get. And they're so polarized that it's hard to really get the truth. It's a spiraling mistrust. See, our perception is our truth. The minorities mistrust the police and government. The police mistrust the minorities. They're getting shot. The others are getting beat and shot. But our perspective, what we think we see, is our truth, regardless of the accuracy. The socialization that we've all experienced becomes inured or hardened to where it's very unlikely that it will change in a moment. It has to take time. We've had much time. We've agreed physical things. We have made an agreement. All the forced things has been accepted. It's a physical fact that there are things that we do physically, but we still haven't crossed the bridge morally, or crossed or finished the march morally. I'm not saying that. It's one of those if the shoe fit wears it thing, you know. I'm not accusing anybody. I'm just saying in our country, this is what we're facing. But see, meeting the challenges are difficult. Removing the filters through objectivity, keeping it real. I remember taking a class. In taking this class, It was on cross-cultural counseling. And the first thing that the guy said is, we've got to look in our own heart and see what kind of prejudice we got. I didn't think I had any. Found out I did. But getting down into the depths of our soul and recognizing those things that exist that creates separation between ourselves and other people have to be dealt with. Now, I understand this is not popular. It's not popular in any place that I am aware of in the South, but I'll say this. I've seen less prejudice outside this church in this area than any area, and I've been in Mississippi, 3 or 4 cities, and I see less prejudice here. I feel more comfortable. See, that's how you tell if you've got prejudice. You find yourself in where you're the minority and see how you feel. Now, if you don't have any apprehensions or fear, then you're getting pretty close. When we meet the challenges, there are challenges that are outside the norms. What is outside the norm is that when you find yourself associating with someone beyond just how you're doing and even eating together or even going to the same church, but you see Sunday's the most segregated time in the United States. Sunday is the most segregated. Shouldn't be. That should be a reverse of that. But the norms are that there are things that are not done. I think it's time for us to do the abnormal long enough that it becomes normal. In other words, treat each other just like we treat or want to be treated. I cannot imagine the emotional feelings on both sides. I cannot imagine. I was around when some atrocities were being committed. But we must cross the bridge. The march must be completed. The first bridge we must cross is we need to find someone willing to partner with us that's on the other side and say, I'm going to go ahead and take the chance. I'm going to go ahead and break the norm. With overtures of humility, disregarding stereotypes. We look at people, we do this all the time. Some people will say, well, they're narrow between the eyes. So you can't trust them. You ever heard that? Can you believe that somebody, I guess, if they lie, their eyes start getting closer together? I don't know if that's the way it happens. By communications, according to Adler, Rodman, and Dupree, communications are very difficult, and we have to work at it if we're going to, and realize that we have these obstacles of prejudice. Even when we're talking to someone in our same group, depending upon the culture that we were raised in, we have difficulty. Communication is one of the most difficult things you'll ever do. How many of you have ever said something to someone to find out it was a lot different when it got back to you? We have, because communication is different. We see through different lens on our eyes. We still must march through misconception and false perception. We must see the obvious and the true obstacles that exist. And we need to expose those with hidden agendas that profit from the tension and profit from the violence. We must march until it becomes the norm. Now, members of the African American community, have experienced enough mistreatment that it's easy to interpret the action of police procedure as prejudicial and unjust. Assault on police officers produce a greater amount of harshness and cold procedure for African Americans, much more so than the white Americans. It becomes a vicious cycle. The cycle must be stopped. We must see through moral eyes. Now, what I'm trying to say and break it down in simple terms is the more violence that the news tries to make negative, whether it's just or unjust, and the more retaliatory things that are done where police officers are being shot, mistrust grows on both sides, grows and grows and grows. And I'm going to tell you something. It can get to the place to where we find it permeating all of our communities. And we find ourselves at war between ethnicities. It needs to be stopped. And where, who is better equipped to stop such things than the church? But we have fears. Our fears are that we're going to have to surrender our culture to another culture. We have fears of being taken over. But I can tell you right now, we need to treat each other just like we want to be treated. There are difficulties and there are enormous disconnects. Preconceived ideas, stereotypes, and great deficits of ethnic emotional IQ. Now that's a big name. Emotional IQ is when a person knows how to interact with another person and have a fair amount of understanding of how they're going to react. When it's right time to joke and when it's not the right time to joke. You walk up to a person at the graveside and you start telling some kind of a funny joke. That's not proper. That's a lack of emotional IQ. Companies are hiring people that have a greater amount of emotional IQ because they can get along with each other better. But what we have in our country is a deficit of emotional IQ to where we don't really know how to respond. I worked with the first black man that worked with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office in Bessemer, Alabama. And we rode around and we learned a lot from each other. He had to ride with me and I had to ride with him. And I learned so much from being able to see into a person's heart and having that communication. And he learned a lot. It's more important than just having a blind eye and coasting through life and not appreciating the implications. Now, if we're going to bring about peace and harmony, along with equal and fair treatment, we must cross that bridge. We must bridge culture, common goals, righteous objectives, and blend a multitude of diversity into one general objective with everyone reaching for their own goal without obstructing another's. And on occasion, you'll look up and you'll see a helping hand coming across the racial border. I went to Atlanta. And this has been several years ago. Now, if you've been in Atlanta, you know that black is not the minority. White is the minority. And I got on the buses, and about maybe one or two other white people besides me. I got on the MARTA, which is the subway. About the same thing. I was treated so well by people that worked there and people that rode that I was overwhelmed. I lost any apprehension of being in such a minority. I felt like I was just accepted. So I was on a bus and I asked, or would begin to tell, it's about 30 people on there, and I just said, you know what? And I just said to everybody, I said, Atlanta has the nicest people that I've ever been around. And I looked at the bus driver, and he said, "You just ain't met them all yet." What I'm afraid of is that we'll have our head in the sand, and we'll think this is somebody else's problem. As long as I do right myself, we're all right. But this is something that needs to be front and center of our prayer life. Because if we don't stop it, it'll escalate until it'll be something that we can't handle. And again, friends will be pitted against friends. And the only thing that'll make a real true difference, that'll make us what God wants us to be, is if we have godly communications, if we talk together. And not be afraid of political correctness, but just interact. And I'll finish with this little story.